Accessibility in games is a good thing. This is probably something we can all agree on. The thing that causes a lot of the disagreements is in the how and the what when we talk about accessibility. Accessibility can be represented in a lot of ways. A lot of games are made with at least 3 difficulties, commonly called easy, normal and hard. In more recent games, the easy difficulty has been made even more easy and relabeled as the story mode difficulty, making the game easy enough that if you're just here for the story, you can do that. This is also because calling the difficulty easy sometimes comes with negative connotations. So the players that need the easier difficulty will simply refuse to use it. One example that comes to mind is Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin.
We're here to kill chaos.
Other games come with just the one difficulty and leaves it to you to find ways to make the game easier for you through things like level grinding. Or sometimes the game is made easy enough by default that it falls to the player to make the game difficult through challenges. Although that is something players do in even the hardest games. Additionally, even if you do everything in your power to grind because you're having a hard time with a boss, some of these games tend to never let the player completely brute force a boss fight with just levels and stats. So this can bar a less skilled player or one with a disability entirely from enjoying the game at all. The Dark Souls series and more recently Elden Ring comes to mind for examples of these kinds of games. Back in the day, if a game was too difficult for you, whether it was because you didn't understand the game or if it was a physical or mental disability preventing you from beating it, there might be very limited options for you. A lot of games came with a few cheat codes that could help you, but often these were excessive overkill. You are having a hard time dodging all of the attacks from the boss. All you need is that the boss doesn't hit quite as hard. The cheat code is complete invulnerability though. Cheat codes have since been replaced mostly by cheat engines that similarly give the player too much control. If you are offered the option to take anywhere between full damage and no damage, why would you choose anything but complete invulnerability? If the cheat engine allows you to have infinite money, why wouldn't you? You already brought out the engine anyway. Which leads me to the subject of accessibility options. More and more, I see games that may or may not have multiple difficulty settings, but certainly do have a set of accessibility options. This is something I see more commonly in indie game titles rather than the big company titles. The reason that I love accessibility options is because this always offers you far more control over what it is you want to be a bit easier and what you don't mind is harder. Because sometimes these accessibility options doubles as ways to challenge yourself too. I want to talk about some examples of how accessibility options can be used in a way to make games accessible for everyone without taking away the accomplishments of beating a hard game. To do this, I want to talk about 4 games in particular with varying levels of accessibility options to try and highlight ways this can be incorporated into games in general. And in case you're wondering, this is totally not just a sneaky way of letting me gush a bit about some of my favorite games. The first game is CrossCode, a single-player RPG about a character that is stuck in an MMORPG. The game is somewhat fast-paced and involves a lot of puzzles, and while some of these things cannot be adjusted with accessibility, there are options, and these are available to adjust at any time you wish. The first one being that time-based puzzles can have their speed halved. The other 2 are exactly the answer to what I was talking about with cheat codes before. You can reduce the damage enemies do to you, but only by up to 80%. Complete invulnerability is not offered because I guess the developers believe you don't need it. They also offer making enemies attack down to half as often, so combining these 2 lets you reduce the damage to 1/10 of what it would normally be. However, if you feel the game goes too fast and you just want it to go a bit slower, you can just reduce the attack frequency and keep the damage the same. Having these 2 options as separate sliders means so much for customization. The game also allows you to overlevel content quite effectively in a lot of places. And aside from a select few key puzzles in the game, the majority of the speed-based puzzles are optional. The key thing I want you to remember is the part where you can reduce the damage enemies do, as well as the frequency of their attacks. I should also mention that CrossCode also has quite a lot of build variety in what gear you wear. And given that you can reset your skill trees, your decisions in the game are for the most part not final and you can change your mind. So you can always switch to a more defensive build if that is what you need without accessibility options. The second game is Crystal Project, a game effectively made to be like a modern take on the classic Final Fantasy games, complete with even allowing your starting team to choose their starting classes. This game separates all this customization into 3 difficulties, an assist options menu and a challenge options menu. The difficulties offering both a more forgiving experience, the standard experience, and the experience where you need to grind. Probably. As the game is a thinking game more so than a fast-paced game, the majority of the accessibility options are related to saving time. You can increase the amount of money or experience you get up to 3 times the normal amount, and you can even increase the max level in the game if you want to. There are also options that allow you to influence the difficulty of the game, letting you increase it later. But the key difference with Crystal Project here is that using an assist option turns it on permanently for that playthrough. This is important. On the other hand, choosing challenge options, which range from randomization choices or making you get less experience or even making the game outright impossible to complete, are locked at the start. While you can reduce the money multiplier from the assist options later, it will still be active for the record. You cannot change your challenge options once you click start. Similar to CrossCode, Crystal Project also has no lock-ins and you can freely customize all 4 of your characters to fit the playstyle you want. The third game is Fellseal Arbiter's Mark, which is extremely similar to Final Fantasy Tactics. Again, a turn-based strategy game, which means that the vast majority of the options are related to the difficulty of the game. Note that I'm saying options, not accessibility options. When you start the game from the beginning, the first thing you are asked is how you want everything to be. You are asked a lot of questions about a lot of things you have no chance of knowing about. What does an enemy having more or less gear really mean? Raw stat differences? Whether enemies scale with your level faster or slower is hard to determine how much matters if you haven't seen how much they scale normally. To help you, 5 difficulty settings have been made that fill these out for you, and in a stroke of genius, none of them are named medium or normal. You can choose beginner or veteran if you like, but we can probably agree that veteran does not sound like the middle ground difficulty, even if it is. Beginner is the difficulty the game offers by default. Fellseal also allows you to, at any time you're not in a cutscene or in combat, to change all of these settings at will. So if you overlevel the game too hard for some reason, you can make it so enemies can scale with you. You can make the enemies harder if you think it is getting a bit easy, or make them easier if you feel it is getting overwhelming. Even if the game wants to be difficult to beat, the game wants you to beat it. So all of these options are here for your enjoyment. Personally, I only care about turning off that pesky injury system. Not only do I not like permadeath, but I don't want my favorite character to be out for a single fight, you see. I don't need this option, I could beat the game without it, but I like to play the game this way. The key takeaway from this game is that there are so many options that a player is likely to set something a specific way just because they like it like that. It isn't even about accessibility, it is about enjoyment. Unlike the other 2 games, Fellseal instead allows you to de-level a character to level them up as the job with the stats you actually want them to have. The point is still that you aren't locked into the decisions you make completely. The 4th game is a whole series of games. The Creeper World game series is an asymmetric strategy game where you protect the human civilization from the pesky endless creeper, the watery substance on the screen here. This game comes with no accessibility options. In fact, every map has one and only one difficulty. However, every single game in the series has a pause button, and at least a double speed button, which is mainly for the impatient players. But a pause button can make a player that is having a harder time with the controls, or that otherwise cannot keep up with the pace of the game, able to participate. Simply by allowing you to pause the game at any time, you are granting a far bigger audience the ability to enjoy the game. In addition to that, instead of having a strict time limit on a level, a score system is used to let you know that beating the level faster is the intended way of play. But due to the tools you are given, you can play most levels in these games extremely slowly and safely. For example, there are stages where I decided to take my time, where I handily beat it in the safest possible way over a 90-minute stalling session. But on a separate playthrough, I beat the same level in 15 minutes because I only built what I had to. Creeper World is more like a stage-based game, so any decisions you make in the game are contained in the individual stage you play. Now, looking at these 4 games, they have similar yet very different approaches to being accessible, ranging from options for ease of combat and gameplay in a fast-paced game, down to something as simple as allowing you to pause the game mid-fight to get a better overview of the battle. Most of these options are presented in a combination of ways, some as accessibility options, some as assist options, and some are simply presented as actual options in the game. The way I see it is that many single-player games, or at least player versus environment games, could only benefit from settings like these. In a strategy game against a CPU, why shouldn't you be allowed to pause the game when you want to take a glance over the battlefield? If you choose to do so, that is your choice. In a game with permadeath for characters, there isn't anything wrong with allowing a setting that removes this feature for players that don't want to deal with it. Presenting it as an assist option lets the player know that it is not the intended way to play, but some players would rather not play at all than have to deal with permadeath. Others might enjoy the game right up until their favorite character dies out of nowhere, and now they're done. In a difficult, fast-paced game with tough bosses, you don't have to add multiple difficulty levels for the players, but adding the option to reduce the damage enemies do, or the speed at which they do, goes a long way to enabling players to participate regardless of what reason they may have to need this. The weirdest argument I've heard against these kinds of options is that being able to turn on these sorts of accessibility options could take away the accomplishment of a player beating the game without them. And I just want to mention this because you have to remember that the players that need these kinds of tools to be able to play are just happy that they get to participate. It was never about beating someone else. It was always about settings allowing the player to enjoy the game without needing to resort to cheating. Now, what I mainly wanted to convey in this video was that there are many ways to go about accessibility options. And as you probably can see, sometimes accessibility options are more about giving the players customization options. And incidentally, this sometimes means that you can allow more players to play at all. You may not even need accessibility options at all in multiplayer games where you are on the same team together. Having the ability to bring friends can sometimes compensate for your lack of ability, whether that is skill or a disability. For example, Final Fantasy XIV, an MMORPG, has a rather long main storyline that, for the most part, can be beaten regardless of your skill, by a combination of other players being able to compensate for your skill, or in solo encounters, you being able to switch to jobs that are more capable in certain fights. As a damage dealer, you can beat most regular content in the game, hardly knowing how to fight at all, through the stronger players on your team compensating. As a tank or a healer, you can brute force your way through most solo encounters through your overwhelming survivability. However, the hardest content in a game may be locked behind a skill barrier or an otherwise insurmountable barrier for some players, and that is okay. A lot of games have so-called post-game content, and it is called post-game because it is designed to be content to enjoy after the credits roll, so to speak. Intended for those that didn't get enough game and want even more. If you felt you already had enough game, you can always go back and try the same fights you already tried on a harder difficulty or trying to do it better. That is also game to enjoy. But at least having a significant amount of content in the game for everyone to enjoy is important for accessibility. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can like the video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when next I post a video. If you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel. Fun fact, accessibility does not even have to be about the actual gameplay or the game options either. It can also be about control options. Simply allowing the player to have a lot of freedom in how they bind actions in the game can allow a player that can't manage a mouse or a keyboard or a standard console controller to also be able to play.